Okay, so today I'll be talking about advanced CSS, aka how to make your website look good, which is important for the competition or just if you want to make a website that's not ugly. So let's get started. So to recap, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it just describes how our HTML boxes look on our website. So what are some examples of things that CSS can do? Well, we learned that it can govern how our layouts look, which is important for things like our nav bar. And we can also change things like fonts and text styles and colors and make button styles, borders, shadows, and things like that. But we can actually do so much more with CSS. So some examples are things like idle animations. So if you see in the title here, like the little animation thing just keeps running. Things like complex layouts, so like a grid system, except like all the boxes don't have to be the same size. Hover animations, so I'm sure you've seen many websites where if you hover over some photo or some link, it gives you like a little like hover card tip or like some alpha mask. And it can also help you do cool layers and transitions. And responsive design, which is really important, like you want your website to be scalable to different devices. And animated modals, which I'm sure you've all seen a lot with like pop-ups and things like that. So why do we care about CSS in the first place? So ideally, like you might think like, oh, if our website is functional and useful, people shouldn't care what it looks like, right? They should just like deal with it. But ultimately, websites are made for people to use. So it's important that the user experience is comfortable and mimics expected behavior. So here's just a fun GIF, like if your website does not mimic expected behavior, like for example, like we all like know how to use like doors, right? Like if we open a door, we'll just all reach for a doorknob to try to open the door. Like we're not going to see a new door and be like, oh, let me start lifting it from the bottom because maybe like I should experiment. No, that's not how it works. Like you want your website to mimic what people expect it to do. So we basically want it to confirm the user's intentions and actions. And something like buttons are just very important because they usually complete some action. So this button layout right here is like, there's something wrong with it. Do people want to drop ideas in the chat on what's wrong with this button layout? Any ideas? Yeah, so basically the pattern for most buttons is that confirmation buttons or like OK buttons are to the right side of cancel buttons. So like when you go to a lot of sites, when they have a pop-up, usually you'll have OK and then you have cancel on the left. And other examples of expected behavior are like red color buttons, meaning like delete or like close, and gray buttons usually being harmless. So this button layout is like weird, but it's not that bad because if you accidentally click cancel instead of OK, you can probably just like reopen the pop-up or something and then repress OK. But for example, if this cancel button here was replaced by a delete button, that'd be pretty bad, right? Like people might accidentally click delete when they wanted to click OK, and that would just not be a good result. So here's another question. So why aren't external libraries enough? I'm sure that most of you know that there's a lot of libraries out there that have like pre-designed modals or button groups or website themes, or like some people might even use Squarespace or WordPress to create their own websites without like doing any styling, like they just make the styling for you. But the problem with these is that if you want to customize something, it's really hard to change very small aspects of the themes because they're already pre-built. So let's say you're using Bootstrap, and this is just some screenshot I pulled from like the how to change like some font like page or whatever. And it's like, it just looks really complicated, right? Like, I don't even know what this is. Like, we just don't want to touch that stuff. And here's another popular package called Material UI. And like, if you just on first look, it seems like a pretty nice package. Like you can use it and modals look pretty nicely styled. But just this is from personal experience. When I tried to change a font on it, it was just really confusing. And like you have to like download stuff, like import stuff. It's like I don't even know what this is. Like whereas if you tried to style it yourself, if you made the CSS from scratch yourself, you don't have to write one line of code. Okay, so even if you use a pre-built package, a lot of the times you'll have to override fonts or colors or sizes just to make it fit into your website flow. So generally this is possible, but it takes more work. So in WebLab here, we encourage you to build your CSS from scratch for your websites. So now, important question, how do we make good CSS? So today we'll be talking about palettes and then reviewing things like a box model, talking more about layouts, and then covering some transitions and animations to make your websites pop. And then finally covering responsive layouts so that your websites can be scalable to different device sizes. So first of all, color palettes. Again, why do we care? Well, one might think like, well, I'm making my own website. I should just be able to choose whatever color I want. And it's like my website, so like I don't really care what other people think. So let's take a look at this example here. I'm just gonna ask you guys what you guys think of this website. If you think it's pretty, if it's ugly, oof. Yeah, okay, someone said hurt my eyes. Exactly. Basically, I hope we all agree that this website is very ugly. And like, I know like beauty is subjective, but like this website's objectively ugly. Please don't disagree on this. So please don't make a website like this either. If you submit this for your final website, we will be sad. But like many qualitative observations, we can think about why this website is ugly. So for one thing, like someone said, it hurts their eyes. Like bright yellow backgrounds are just not good. Like you don't want to make a bright yellow background. Like people will just be like, I don't want to like look at this website, like no matter what the content is. And the text colors don't really stand out here in the nav bar. Like you have like this dark pink on orange, and it just doesn't like it's not nice for the user to look at. And the peak is too bright, and there's also just way too many colors on this page. So important thing is, as a general rule of thumb, we want websites to generally stick to around 2 to 3 theme colors. So you should sort of like stick to these theme colors for all of your like modals, buttons, and things, so it doesn't get too like scatterbrained. 2 to 3 colors. Why is it not advancing? Okay, there we go. 2 to 3 colors. How many theme colors do we have? 5, 10, 100? No, 2 to 3. 2 to 3. Okay. So here's an example of different types of color contrasts. On the left, good contrast. On the right, bad contrast. And here's more color contrast examples. So at this point, you may be thinking, okay, color is important, but how am I supposed to know what colors look good? So like, I don't want to spend like hours trying to test out like different color themes just to fail. So we fully understand your concerns. So we recommend using this site called colors.co. And it auto-generates color palettes that are pleasing to the eye. Like you can just go to the site and you can click like generate, and you can toggle through like different color themes. And these are like, yeah, they just look nice. And here are some other examples of good color palettes that you can find online. Okay, so that's about color for now. Let's quickly review the box model. We already went over it in workshop 1 with Tommy, so we're gonna go pretty fast on this part. Basically, we have our main text area here. And outside of the text area is what the padding is. So you can set padding equals like 2 pixels or 3 pixels or 10 pixels. That's right outside the area here. And then outside of padding, surrounding the padding is border. So this black outline here, that's the border. And you can also set the border width of that, border styles, border colors. And then outside of the border is the margin. So this yellow highlighted area is the margin. So if you don't have a border, one thing to watch out for is if you don't have a border, like if you don't have a border set, the setting margin and setting padding might like seem like the same thing, but it's still not. So just make sure you know the difference between margin and padding. So now on to layouts. We're going to cover 2 major properties of layouts today, which is display and position. And starting with display, so display determines how elements size and sit with and within each other. So to go into more detail, the first example we're going to cover is display block, which is the default property for divs. So if you don't like set any sort of display property, then it will just default to block. It's basically what the name says. It's just a big block that stretches across your website, and it always sits on new lines. So some examples that use display block are div, like default div, so section, underline, paragraph, headers, header. And here's an example of a block display. So if you put this dummy thing inside a div, like display block, then it'll just make it a new line. So another another display property is inline, which just basically, it puts the element that is, and the element that is part of a text, it puts it in line with the rest of the text like you would expect. And the size is proportional to the text. So you can't really set like the width or height properties of it. It would just auto set itself. So examples are span and A, which is like for hyperlinks, and images. So this is an example of an inline display. And the variation on inline is inline block. So it's similar to inline, but this time you can actually customize the size of whatever you're trying to put in your paragraph. So you can set the width and height yourself. And this is useful for including non-text elements within text. So here's an example of inline block. You can make it like taller if you want. It'll just push the rest of the text downwards. Okay, so display none, final one, just literally not there. And if you put display none on dummy, it will just be not there. And you might think like, oh, this is useless. Well, sometimes it's useful. Maybe you'll find instances where it's useful. Or if you want it to like fade in or something, you might do display none. And then like display, yeah. So now forget about putting things within text. How do we go about putting boxes side by side? A hint, feel free to drop your ideas in the chat. A hint is that we went over some ways to do this in both workshop 0 and workshop 1. Yeah, Flexbox. Okay, so there's multiple solutions. We're first going to talk about flex boxes, which is you do display flex. And as a review, they attempt to flexibly contain and distribute elements inside of itself. So it's pretty useful because you don't really have to set a lot of parameters. It'll just sort of like distribute itself for you. So here we have 3 boxes. And a reminder is that the display flex goes on the parent container. So you don't put display : flex on these child components. You put it on the parent container. And then every child component will be distributed flexibly within the parent container. And then this is another example. If you have 4 boxes, then they'll just shrink by auto shrink. So here are more examples of flex. Basically, oh yeah, you just put flex in the parent container here, and the cards will distribute themselves half-half. You can also adjust the CSS of the cards themselves. So you can like set the margin, padding, border radius. Border radius, remember to put border radius on your buttons because like sharp rectangular buttons are just usually ugly and usually you don't want to use them. And you can also set specific parameters for like the cards themselves. So if you want the left card to be larger than the right card, you can set like the width of the left card to be 60%, which means 60% of the parent container. And then if you don't set card 2, it will just auto to like 40%. Yeah, these colors hurt. The importance of color. Okay, and then there's also this important property called justify content. This is something you use along with like flex display. So if you use justify content, you can set things like space between, which means it'll like push the child components as far away from each other as possible within the parent container. And then there are also other properties for other options for justify content, such as center, which just like sticks them together in the center here. Or you can do start, which like sticks them together at like the start, which in this case happens to be the left side here. Space evenly just means it'll distribute it like with regards to like this overall space in the parent. So like this one will be like somewhere here, and then this one will be like somewhere here. Okay, and you can feel free to test these out on your own to see like what they look like with like different numbers of cards and things like that. So the other way to put boxes side by side, we went over in workshop 1 with the snake game, is display grid. So this just basically creates a grid of the child elements, and it's pretty similar to Flexbox, except that it makes you able to also adjust like 2D attributes. So you can adjust, like in Flexbox, you can like adjust like the axis along which like the elements are displayed. You can like adjust the width and things like that. And for grid, you can also adjust like row height and things like that. So an example, this just basically looks similar to a Flexbox. If you have like grid, you do display grid on the container, and then you do like grid template columns, which is how you set the width of each column, and FR stands for fraction. So this just means each one occupies the same fraction, so 1/3. And then you can also readjust like different, if you want to make the left box larger, 2 times larger than the other ones, you can do 2FR, 1FR, 1FR. So this will just take up half, 1/4, 1/4. Okay, and you can also adjust like however you want. So you can also adjust the row heights, which was what I'm talking about. Like you can do this with grid, but you can't do this with flex. So if you want to set the first row to 100 pixels and the second to 200 pixels high, you would write it like this. Then let's say you want to make 2 columns now and 3 rows, then you would just change your CSS like so. So now you have 2 columns here and then 3 row properties here. And it would just distribute itself as you say. So now we finished talking about the basics of display. We're going to talk more about position. So it's a little bit, the definition sounds a bit similar to display. It determines where an element sits based on other elements. So we're going to go into more detail on what that means. So the first default property for position is static, which just renders boxes positions based on the order that you write them in your code. So pretty self-explanatory. Like in your code, if you have class name B1, so let's say this class, like this box's class is B1, and then you put a code section below it that's box 2, it will just put it below it on your screen. So this is position static. But now what if we want to have box 2 to like move a little bit down? Like let's say we want it to like look something like this, and we want to have like an extra margin at top. So now like we can't simply just set like margin top equals like some number, because we want the position of box 2 to be based on like the position of box 1. So let's say we move box 1 or we make box 1 taller. We don't want to like recalculate the pixel positions every single time. So instead, we can use something called position relative. And it's pretty self-explanatory in its name, but it positions the element relative to where it would be if it were completely static. So this is useful for small modifications in position. So for example, the CSS, we just have like random rules here. For box 2, if we put position : relative, and then we did top 10 pixels, it would shift the box 2 down 10 pixels from where it would be if it were static. Okay, so now forget about laying boxes like next to each other or relative to each other. Let's say we want box 2 to just be like, have its position completely like indifferent to what box 1 does. Like we just want box 2 to be like stuck on the bottom of the screen or something like that. So let's say like, we could calculate the pixels from the top again, but like we said, like this is like cumbersome, right? Like we have to like do a bunch of calculation. If we change something, we have to like recalculate it again. It just seems bad. So we would use something called position absolute. By the way, if these things are like hard to remember, like the slides will go up on the website later, so you can refer back to them when you're making your website. So position absolute just places the element relative to the ancestor. So now it doesn't care about what comes like right before it or anything like that. It cares about what's like containing it, so the parent container. And then it's useful for things like nav bars or sidebars if you just want them to always like be like stuck to like a place, like regardless of the other things around it. So how you would do in code is you would do position on the thing that you want to be positioned absolute. You do position : absolute. And then like, let's say you want it to be stuck to the bottom, you could just do bottom 0 pixels. and then you would have box 2 stuck to the bottom of your window, bottom of your, window. Okay, so now that we have figured out how to put stuff absolute, here's another challenge. So what if we want to use some sort of sticky div, like a sticky navbar? You see this sometimes where like if you scroll down the page, navbar will still always be at the top of your window. So if we do a position absolute here, if we scrolled, then it would like move up our screen like this, because like if our page is really long, then like it would just not stick to the bottom like we assume it to be. So yeah, so we want something that like scrolls down, always stays at the bottom of our window when we scroll. But then that would make us have to do like maybe something like negative pixels. And this just seems messy again. We don't want to calculate random arbitrary pixel values. So we would use something called position fixed. So position fixed just places the element relative to your screen. And it's useful for things like navbars or bulletins where you want them stuck to a position relative to your screen at all times. So how you would do this in code is you do position : fixed on your component you want to be fixed. And then like let's say here, bottom 0 pixels, left 0 pixels. So now no matter how much you scroll, it will always be on the bottom left of the screen. Okay, so now how would we center a div horizontally? This is something that probably most of you will end up having to do either for like your landing pages or login buttons or like titles or things like that. So does anyone have any ideas that we want to drop into the chat? Yeah, so these are all good ideas. We're going to talk about some of them. There's many solutions for this. We're just going to cover two. So one of them is with Flexbox, like some people said, and you just have a flex, display flex on your parent container, and then justify content center. And then the child element, you could just do like margin auto. So it would auto set the margins for you, and then it would put your child div in the center of your parent container. And another way to do it, this is one way that I like to do it, is to use the calc function and use the viewport width. So VW, so I use one, so if you look here, this is the syntax for that. And 100 VW just stands for 100 viewport width, which is just the full width of the window. And then calc is one of the few functions that you can use in CSS. So you might have noticed that a lot of times CSS can't really do like complicated coding logic like you could do in JavaScript, but it can use this function called calc, which just calculate math equations. So you could just do calc 100 viewport width minus half of the width of like the element that you're trying to center, and then it would center your element, have like the way you want. Oops. Oh yeah, so some other relevant relative length units that may be useful are VH, which is viewport height, and EM, which is the current font size, and one we mentioned before with grid display, which is FR, which is fraction. So again, there are many solutions that we didn't cover here. You can either like figure that out yourself, find them online, but these are two main ones that you can use. And yeah, there are also some solutions that are bad. One of the bad solutions is float. Float left, float right. Please do not use float because float is bad, so we won't talk about it. Yes, boo float. Okay, now on to transitions and animations, which I think is what some of you guys are waiting for. This makes your websites look snazzy and look cool. So yeah, transitions, starting with transitions. So determine how changes in properties show up on your screen. So as an example, here's just a coding snippet. So let's say I have a container, and then inside the container, I have a card that says hello. And then the card, we want it to have a transition when I reload, like when I first enter the page, I want like the color to like fade in. So what I'll do is I'll set like the property that I want to change. So I want to change the background color. That's the thing that I'm transitioning. And then we will set the time span. So I want my transition to take 1 second long. And then the type of like transition, like the way it'll change. This is a keyword called ease in. It just basically means, I think it's like starts out slowly and like speeds up. So it's just like eases in. But there's also other things like ease out or ease in out or things like that. They all sound really similar, but yeah, if you have it as 1 second, it doesn't really make a huge difference. So let's see what it looks like in action. Okay, I will minimize. And oops, where is my code? Okay, I did background color 1 second ease in. And I set my background color to be blue in this case. Can you guys see the code? Is it large enough? Yes, okay. So I set the background color to be blue and I want it to ease in after 1 second. So let's go to my example HTML code and oops, okay. And let me refresh. Yeah, wait, let me optimize it for video clip. How do you set the color before it eases in? I think it defaults to the container color. I might be wrong on this, but I that's what I believe happens. So you can set the container color to something else, or you can use an animation, which we will talk about in a second. So, where's my code? Okay, yeah. So that's basically a transition. We can also do things like transition on like, if you hover your mouse over the thing, you want it to change color. So that's commented this back in. So the syntax for that is .card : hover. And then you would put whatever you want in the bracket. So this is similar to regular CSS classes, except it just, whatever you put in here only happens when you hover over the card. And by the way, when you want like to test hover animations and things like that, you need to make sure your mouse is selected on the window, else it won't work and you'll think your code is bad, but in reality, it's just you being bad. Okay, so color white. Oops, let's try background color white. So this will sort of inherit like this ease in transition here. Let's refresh again. Wait, no, I want a different color. Background color pink. And then go here, refresh. And then when I move my mouse over, I'll turn it pink. Expected behavior is good. Okay, so that's basics of transition. One thing to note about transitions is that they only happen once. So if you want something to like loop over and over again, you want to use something, instead of transition, you want to use something called animation, which is what we will talk about now. Okay, so back to slide. Where is slide? Slide, okay. Back to slide. So next, we're going to talk about animations, which is like transitions, basically, but more powerful. So you can make them happen like multiple times or infinitely. And they just define keyframes to transition through. So I don't know how many of you guys have worked in like iMovie or something before, or I don't know, video editing, but keyframes are just basically points in time that you want things to happen. So for code, you would just define points in time where you want certain aspects of your visual elements to change. So now we're going to go back to our code and experiment with different animations. Let's go back to our HTML and yeah, okay. So let's make an animation. So let's remove this transition first. And the CSS for this is you do animation, and then you want to create a name for your animation. So you can name it whatever you want. I'm just going to name mine, I don't know, fun animation. No, I want to name it something else. Web lab. Okay. And then we want to say how long we want our animation to take. So let's say 2 seconds, 2s, and how many times you want to repeat. So you can do 1, you can do 2, you can do 3, you can do infinite. We're going to do infinite. Okay. So Funimation, get copyright strike. No. Okay. So now we have to define what our keyframes do. And the syntax for that is @ symbol keyframes. And then you put the name of your animation, so the code knows what you're trying to do. And then you do the open curly bracket. You don't have to follow along, by the way, this is just a demo. I might post the code later if people want. But how you define keyframes, then you can just do like whatever percentage of 2 seconds you want. So you can do like 0%. So what happens at the start of the animation, and you can define what happens at the end of the animation. So 100%. Okay, so within these, now it's similar to like what you did with like card hover, which is just you can define the attributes that you want to change or what you want to happen at these particular timestamps. So at 0%, let's say I want, so this is at the start of the animation. Let's say I want the color of the text to be red. And then at 100%, let's say I want the width of the box to be 300 pixels. Okay, so let's save this. Let me make this smaller and I'll refresh. So that's our animation. Oh, is it low res? Sad. Okay, well, do you guys at least see that's moving? Okay, yeah. So this is the gist of animations. Basically, you can see like, you just have a loop over and over again. These are just boring attributes like color, width, like, oh, it's so boring. Okay, we can do other things. So we can also define like intermediary keyframes, 50%. Let's do one at 75%. Let's make it rotate. So to rotate, you can do like transform. Okay, yeah, rotate. So you can do transform, rotate. Let's say we can want to do 180 degrees. And then at 50%, let's say we want to make, I don't know, font size 300 pixels. Just doing random things here. So also you don't have to put just one thing in each keyframe. You can do like, here I want to also change, I don't know, background color to orange. Yes, this is a huge font. You guys will see in a second. Okay. That's our animation. But yeah, animations are very fun. You can have a lot of fun experimenting with how you want your animations to look. Yeah, so a brief interlude. Thank you, Kai. A brief interlude is, I think someone mentioned that they wanted to do like something rolling on your screen. So let's try to do that. You would basically just do rotate like you do it here. But square, okay, this is so annoying. Let me turn it off for a second. Okay, so let's say we want to make our box a circle because boxes rolling are like stupid, right? So we want our box to be a circle. Does anyone have any ideas on how to make this a circle using pure CSS? Radius. Yes, border radius. Okay. Oh, yeah, someone said it. Okay, border radius 50%. So basically border radius, for those who don't remember, just makes your like corners rounded. So however you set it, you can set like pixel values. You can set like large pixel values. And if you want to make it a circle, you would just do border radius 50%. And that's, I think, the max percentage you can do that still makes it look like, still makes visible changes. So border radius 50% makes it a circle. Save this, refresh. Now it's a circle. Okay, so now we have our circle and we want it to, let's make a new animation. I don't want to go back to that. Okay. What do you want to name it? I mean rolling. And then let's roll it for, I don't know, 0.5 seconds, and then infinite. Okay, so keyframes, rolling. Let's do 0%. At 0%, let's say we want it to be like upside down. So transform, rotate, negative 180 degrees. And then let's do at 100%. We want it to roll an entire circle. Oops, what is this? Oh, go away. Okay. So save that. Go back here. Oh, wait, no. Wait, this just spins it. Okay, first of all, this just spins it. But let me make the text white. Okay, this just spins our circle. If we want to roll, we also have to translate it. So, margin left, let's do 200 pixels. Let's make this a little bit smaller. Rolling! Hooray! Oh, it does not roll smoothly. It like, right now it's like going to the right and then it's like completely stopping and resetting and rolling to the left, if that's what you mean. Because I set my margin left here at the end as 200. And then in between 100 and going back to 0, it like jumps. So like if we wanted to roll like back and forth smoothly, we could set it at 50%, 200 px. And then we want the position at the end to be the same as the beginning. So if we do that, I think that works. Okay, yeah. So now it just like rolls back and forth. Okay. Can you make it transition at a constant speed? I was experimenting with this, and I think it's just like if you want it to roll at a constant speed, you would have to set more keyframes. So you could do like 0%, 15%, 30%, and like set it like that. I'm not sure if there's another way to do it. Okay, yeah. So that's basic rolling. You can also do other things like, I don't know, dropping it down. Then you would just set like margin top instead of margin left, and then you don't have to set the rotation. And another one thing to note is that for graphics, brief interlude into graphics is that when you're doing stuff like dropping things or things like that, you don't have to care too much about like calculating physics equations, because when it shows up on the screen for like 0.5 seconds, like the end users are not going to tell like, oh, at like 9.8 seconds per, like it's not dropping at like 9.8 like meters per second square, like, oh, this website is bad. Like it's like pretty negligible. So as long as your graphics are reasonable, then that's fine. Okay, so web lab does not equal 801. Exactly. Okay, so now let's go back to our goodbye animation. Let's go back to our presentation. Oops. Okay, presentation. We are done looking at code. So now we're going to finally talk about responsive layouts. So again, what are responsive layouts? Fact is that we'll be designing our websites and testing it based on what we see on our own screens and monitors, but that's not what the end users are going to see. So people are going to be viewing our websites on multiple devices, multiple size monitors, phones, tablets, and things like that. And we want to be able to design our websites so that the viewing experience is like reasonable across different ratios and sizes. Like we don't want to design some website that looks like perfect on your own screen and then someone else tries to access it from their phone and it looks terrible, and that's just sad. So one thing we can do is to use media queries, which basically it tells the code like, oh, I only want to make it look like this if the width of your window is a certain size. So this is useful for things like mobile versus web design. Like if you want your web design to look a certain way, but on mobile, let's say you don't want to show like some image because it's too wide, then you can just use a media query. So you can like check if the device screen is a certain size, if the device supports hovering, if the device supports certain colors, or if it supports additional features like speech input, aspect ratio. Yeah, you can just control these things. Okay, back to our code. We will look at one last thing in our code, I think, before we close VS Code, before I close VS Code. Okay, so let's use a media query. Okay, back to our lovely circle over here. So let's say I want, actually, let me make this wider. Okay, so let's say I want to only show. Okay, so first of all, the syntax for media queries is like you do @media, and then you do parentheses, and the aspect that you want to control. So most of the times it'll probably be something like max width, because you want to check the width of your window, and then max width colon, let's say, I don't know, 800 pixels. So this basically, whatever you put in this box, I mean, in this curly braces, will apply to all windows that are 800 pixels or less wide. So let's say I want within this, if it's 800 pixels or less, I want the background color to be, wait, no, I need to set, okay. And then you need to set like what class you're looking at. So here, let's say I want the card background color to be pink if it's less than 800 pixels. So I save this, I refresh, and it's still blue because this window is greater than 800 pixels. But let's try to reduce the size of this window. Okay, it turned pink now. Yeah, so we hit 800 pixels, so it turned pink. And if you view this on like a mobile device, then it'll just always be pink because the mobile device is always less than 800 pixels wide. And a nifty trick you can use to test like mobile friendliness and things like that is on your console. If you do a right click, inspect, you can change there's like this thing here, you guys can see. There's this thing up on the top left corner of your console called toggle device toolbar. What does that do? Okay, so you click on that. Oops, oh, I clicked on it. Okay, click on it here. There's a drop down and you can choose like to test on like, let's say I want to test on iPhone X. So it'll give me the iPhone X dimensions and I can see what my website looks like on iPhone X. Can also do other things like, this is what an iPad Pro dimension looks like. Galaxy S5. Or you can just simply do responsive and set like random parameters yourself. So you can just test like what it would look like on like some, I don't know what kind of screen this is, but you can just test on different dimensions. So yeah, that's toggle device toolbar here on your console. Remember to make good use of it. And then, yeah, so back to our presentation. We can also see it on action on weblab.mit.edu. Hope you guys have all been on the site at some point. Basically, we see like we have our nav bar up here, which is pretty common on the, desktop websites, because like nav bars, it's just easy to navigate when your screen is wide. But when you have a narrow screen, like on a mobile device, usually we have something called a hamburger menu, which slides out. So let's try making this window skinnier. Okay, it turned into a hamburger menu. So you saw the nav bar disappeared somewhere around here. Yeah, so then we have our hamburger menu, and when you click it, the nav bar becomes this vertical thing that slides out. Yeah. So these tend to be more mobile friendly because like if you have a really wide nav bar on mobile, it'll just be really hard to click things. Okay, so now we're going to talk about special CSS selectors. And a recap of selectors is type selectors. So A, P, H1, div, etc. like built-in types. We can just set them like A, open curly bracket, whatever we want. And this will just apply to everything that has an A tag. And then class selectors, the one we've seen the most of, which just lets you do dot class name, and it will apply everything, all the CSS within the curly braces to whatever class, whatever div that has this class name. We can also select by ID, which is you just do hashtag ID name. You can do hashtag my card here. So everything with ID, the thing with ID equals my card would be applied text color white. And okay, a new one we're going to talk about is attribute selectors. So basically you can like, you're not limited to just filtering by class name or ID. You can set, so simply this one is like similar to like this previous example because it's also just using ID, but you can basically set other things as well. Like besides ID, you can also use like regex filtering, which we'll talk about in a bit. So like for this example, you just set everything that has an ID equal to hello world, margin left 300 pixels. So attribute selectors, more about them. You can find elements based on any attribute, not just class and ID, and you can filter with attributes that start with, end with, or contain. So you don't simply have to do attribute equals. You can filter them like so. So for example, if you guys want to do something like, oh, you want to match all, oh no, oops, okay. If you want to match all IDs that start with hello, you would do caret equals, and then this would match, in this example, it would match hello world and hello web lab, and it would set the text color equals to red. If you want to do match all IDs that end with world, it would match hello world here, hi world here, and it would underline first one, third one. And then if you want to match all IDs that contain a certain string, then you could just do asterisk equals, and it would match all three of them here because they all have -w, and they would put one px solid border around all of them. Yeah, so those are attribute selectors. Now we're going to talk a little bit about CSS combinators, which can be used to select elements in relation to other elements. So it can be used to identify things like siblings, children, descendants. So an example is adjacent siblings. If you do like h2 plus p and then open bracket, whatever you put within these curly brackets will be applied to all paragraph tags that directly follow an h2 tag. And then there's also general siblings where you have this tilde here. So p tilde span, and it would select all spans that follow an HP. So the difference between this and this is that this has to directly follow, whereas for this one, you can have a bunch of different stuff in between, but as long as span comes after it, it will be applied. And then child/descendant ones are basically if you have like UL greater than LI, or just like whatever you have here, like some div greater than some other type of div, it will select all of the right side div here that is directly inside like the div on the left. So this will select all LI that's directly inside a UL. And then for regular descent, like all general descendants, it selects all of this right side div anywhere inside the left type of div that you set. So it doesn't have to be directly within. It can be like nested, like, I don't know, nested 2 times, nested like 5 levels in, but as long as it's a descendant, it will apply. Can you do H2 plus for anything after an H2? Wait, what do you mean? Like if you want to select anything that's after an H2, like no matter how many things are between, you would use a general sibling. Oh, if you do H2 plus, I'm not sure, I haven't tried that syntax, but you can try yourself if you want. Okay. So, yeah, so here's an example. For CSS combinators, you have an example here, which is UL greater than LI. And then for those, you want the color to be blue. So you see here that these are blue. And then if you have OL greater than LI, and you have color red, then it would set these that have LI inside an OL, opening and closing, it would set those equal to red. Okay, so CSS pseudo classes are used to specify selectors that are purely CSS, not directly represented in the HTML. So you've seen one already, which is hover. Remember when we like moved our mouse over like the box and it turned, I don't remember what color I put, like pink or red or something. So cool hover rules. Yeah, so that's one of the examples of pseudo classes. And some other ones are active. So if you click on a link, it'll turn active. And then input : focus, which is like, let's say you have a bunch of tabs on your website and users can like tab through like the different tabs. And like when you're on a tab, you want it to like look a certain color. So you would use input focus. And then you can also do like nth child. So you want to set like a different CSS style for like each fourth child, for example, then you would use this pseudo class nth child. There's a lot of other ones you can look at. You can see like look at the docs on the web. But yeah, they're pretty useful. So for example, input focus, another commonly used place is for input text boxes. So if the user clicks on a text box to try to type on it, then it's focused. So like, for example, we set the focus background color to be red. So then it will be red here. And then an example of using nth child, you don't have to set like a number here. You can also do odd, even, which happen to be keywords. So then it would just do everything here would turn blue, and everything here would turn red. So as you can see in the example on the bottom, the bar is covering it for me. I don't know if you guys see it, but okay, yeah, hopefully you get the point. And then pseudo elements used to style specific parts of selected elements. So what we saw before was pseudo classes. Now these are pseudo elements. So you can do pseudo elements. Difference in syntax is you have double colon now instead of single colon. You don't have to be mobile friendly for the MVP. You don't even have to be mobile friendly for the final product, except like if it's not mobile friendly, it's like it's good design to have it be mobile friendly. So first line, then it would select the first line of whatever your paragraph text is. And then colon selection is like when a user highlights a text, what style do you want to like have it show? And you can also do colon after, which will apply styling placed in stuff after every A element. So this is an example. We used P colon first line. So it turned the first line down here red and turned the font weight to bold. And we can also do P colon first letter. And then it changed the first letter font size to 30 pixels. That's why it's so large here. And then we can use P colon after. So after every P, in this case, there's only one P, but if you had multiple, it would put it after each one. And we can add content actually. So in the CSS, we can still add content. And then here's the content. It says this isn't in the HTML. And the font weight is bold and we transform it to uppercase. So that's P colon after. So warning is that you might see CSS code online. And if you copy it directly into your CSS file and expect it to work, you might be sad. So like if you want to use SCSS code, make sure like know that it's different. Like there are some aspects that are similar, but they also have extra stuff that CSS doesn't support. So make sure if you want to use it, you have to delete those parts or like translate it into CSS. Okay, so is that all there is to know about CSS? Nope. The things that you can do with CSS are endless. But today we only barely scratched the surface. But with this lecture, I hope that is giving you guys some more ideas on how much you can achieve with just a few lines of code and how to make your websites look cool. Any questions? Or feel free to put them in the questions doc as well. Otherwise, we will end this lecture. Shannon, are there any announcements?
No, I don't think so. Nick? Oh, we have office hours tonight. If you guys want to come, 7 to 9, gather.
Oh yeah, come to office hours. We all love to help. They will always be in Gather, and the pinned Piazza post has the link and password. Okay, I will end here. Thanks for coming, guys. Good luck on your websites.